the epic moment for me is Coach Fambro coming in and talking to the team, and it was like, holy cow, this is different. Obviously, anytime you have a state versus a state that are right next to each other, you're going to feel some tension. But it was, I had no idea the emotion behind the fan base around this game. So that's kind of when it became clear to me. I think his quote that I recall was I'm going to fill up on gas and I'm going to take my cooler of peanut butter jellies and drinks, and I'm not going to spend a penny in the state. As soon as the game's over, I'm turning around and driving back, and I was like, holy cow, man, this is awesome.
Pay heed all who enter and beware of this podcast. That's right. This is the Pay Heed podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, and of course, me with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. In case you haven't heard, in case you didn't know, it's Missouri week. Kansas is going to be taking on Missouri in Columbia coming up on Saturday. And if you haven't already, I highly encourage you to check out some of our former player interviews that we have been doing over the course of this week. Had a great conversation with Tony Sands. Of course, I mean, he's just a master motivator. If you're not ready to run through a brick wall after you're listening to Tony Sands, then something may be wrong with you. I don't know what to tell you. We also talked to David Lawrence, member of the Jayhawks Radio Network, who offered some fantastic insight on more old. I don't want to use the term old timey because I'm not trying to, but back in the day, I guess, of how the rivalry went. Some great stories for him talking about Don Fambro. We're going to be continuing, by the way, with another player interview coming up later on in this show at the end with Bill Whittemore, who was the quarterback for Kansas in the early 2000s. And I don't mean to age you, Kevin, but you covered Bill Whittemore actually at the time that he played at KU back in 2002, 2004. So looking forward to that conversation with Bill coming up later on the show. And also, I do want to tease, we have one more very special guest planned coming up later on Friday that you'll definitely want to tune in for. Let's just say he played in probably the biggest KU Missouri game in football history in 2007 and made one of the greatest plays in the rivalry as well, possibly in 2008. So that's a little bit of a teaser for what you can expect later this week with our final guest, a former player, to talk about KU and Missouri. On today's show, we're going to be previewing KU and Missouri a little bit more in depth. As I said, then you're going to get a chance to hear from Bill Whittemore, who played in the game, won another really great game in the history of the rivalry in 2003 against Missouri and Lawrence as well. So you get a chance to hear from him coming up later on in the show. But Kevin, it's finally here. I mean, this has been it's been a long buildup, I think, to this game, to this rivalry returning. I think when it was announced that this is going to be coming back, there was a lot of mixed feelings, right? And I thought, just real quick, going back to our discussion with David Lawrence, which again, highly encourage checking that out. He made a comment about would Don Fambro, if he were alive, want this rivalry to return, and he was pretty adamant that yes, right? Like This is a rivalry that makes college athletics better, right? Because of the pageantry of it and how significant it is. Games like this are the reason why people love college athletics, and in the current state of the current landscape of college athletics is these types of games are going away, right? And so I think to have it back, I even myself, I had some mixed feelings when this was announced that it was going to come back of, do we really want to play those losers again? They left, like, I don't know, screw them, but the bottom line is really the past 3 weeks, essentially, I've only been thinking about this game. I mean, I know KU obviously played Fresno State and Wagner, but I've been more excited about this game coming back now than I ever have been. So that's kind of my take on it. But looking at this game, Kevin, it's obviously a big game for Kansas, right? You're 2-0. You're heading into your last game of non-conference play before you start conference play. What's your early thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, you kind of looked at Fresno State and Wagner as parts of the Missouri game, right? Like when you went in to play Fresno State, it wasn't, I'm so excited to watch KU play Fresno State. It was, well, this will give KU a chance to be tested before they play Missouri. When they played Wagner, it was, okay, they played well against Fresno State. They're going to beat Wagner. this will be, a chance for them to clean some things up, though, before Missouri. And so I think that's one of the things about it. I think this is a toxic rivalry, honestly, Nick. I think that for a lot of different reasons, but I certainly understand, so many people being excited about its return. And obviously this is a rivalry that goes beyond what happens on the football field, on the basketball court, all of those different things. And there's a lot of history to that as well. From an actual game standpoint, though, Nick, because, that's the thing about it is we can talk all we want about, Civil War and how are you preparing them to deal with the rivalry? You got to play football on Saturday. And I think that one of the things that was really interesting was hearing Lance Leipold talk about how they want the players to be energetic but not emotional. And I think when you look at this football game, it's one between two teams that I think have pretty big expectations for themselves this season. Missouri, I think, feels like they want to be a college football playoff team, especially if Bo Pribula can be the type of quarterback that they think he can be. I think Kansas has, a roster and some interesting pieces where it's like, hey, let's make a run at double-digit wins and maybe Arlington. And this is a key part of those goals. And so I think that strip all the rivalry aside, and it's so hard to do that, obviously. This is a game between two football teams that really, I don't want to say they need this game, Nick, but it's a very important game for both teams, even outside of the rivalry aspect of it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an important game. I will say that obviously these teams aren't in the same conference anymore. So I look at it and say, hey, if whoever is the losing team in this matchup is still going to have their entire season in front of them, right? Like this is not going to necessarily directly impact those goals that you just outlined, right? If KU is able to win this game and Missouri loses, right? It's not, hey, Missouri is out of college football playoff contention or out of SEC contention. Same with Kansas, right? If Kansas loses this game, it's not, hey, no more Big 12 title shot, right? That's the thing. Is like, that's what I find so fascinating about this particular iteration of the game is I do feel like there is a lot of that pageantry, especially from the fan bases, a lot of that energy, a lot of that, viciousness of the rivalry. And at the same time, I think both teams, whoever is to lose in this game, could walk away and say, what did really lose, right? When playing the game. So I think that's kind of an interesting dynamic. But yeah, I think the biggest storyline for me when you look at Missouri is obviously we were discussing a lot about who their starting quarterback is going to be. You have Sam Horn suffer what appears to be a fairly significant leg injury against Central Arkansas. So that basically ends the conversation on the quarterback battle. Bo Pribula is going to be the quarterback. And then he kind of reaffirmed that by going out and having a really great game against Central Arkansas for Missouri. He threw for almost 300 yards and ran the ball pretty well as well, which is obviously the running part is a major concern for KU. I mean, Pribula had 65 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. So that's a concerning part for Kansas when you think about some of the historical struggles they've had over the past 4 or 5 years of dealing with mobile quarterbacks. So you think about that, and then you think about Hardy, the running back from Missouri, who had a really great game as well against Central Arkansas. And obviously they've got a lot of weapons on the outside at receiver. I think we'd kind of talked about it, I think on our post-game show of the Wagner game last week on Friday night, of the one area where Missouri looked like there might be a chink in the armor offensively was the offensive line. Yeah. And you look at the D-line for Kansas, you were able to get Dean Miller out there a little bit against Wagner. We've talked about how we feel the strength of this team right now is the interior of the defensive line and the defensive tackle position. You think about a guy like Justice Finkley, you think about Leroy Harris, who has come on so significantly. So that maybe feels like the key matchup. And I even remember us talking about this game back in the summer, Kevin, and I really felt like the trenches were going to be a key matchup then at the time. And now sitting here 2-3 days away from the actual game, I feel even more strongly about the fact that this game is probably going to be won or lost in the trenches on both sides of the ball. When you look at the defensive line that KU has matching up against Missouri, and when you look at the strength of maybe Missouri's team as well, their defensive line going up against KU's offensive line.
Yeah, both offensive lines have their hands full. And I think that when you look at this, it's such a fascinating game. In college football, like in boxing, styles make fights, right? And I think when you look at the different matchups, there's so many intriguing ones in this one. I think Missouri's wide receivers look terrific, and they're going up against a Kansas secondary that so far has been kind of untested. Missouri's running back, Hardy, is really, really good. He's going up against a Kansas linebacker group that, is kind of banged up right now. But you also have Kansas's defensive line going up against an offensive line that had some moments where they maybe struggled to protect a little bit, weren't super polished, any of those different things. Missouri's pass rush, as good as I think it is, Jalen Daniels negates a lot of pass rush with his escapability. You saw him last year against West Virginia. It was a game that, his hair was on fire, and he was basically able to escape a lot of that. Kansas State, was a terrific pass rushing team a year ago, and Jalen Daniels is a guy that's really, really difficult to sack and can create some other things. And so when you look at Kansas's offensive line going against Missouri's defensive line, that front seven, I think there's so many matchups in this one that you could point to it and basically say, hey, if KU wins, it's going to be because of this. If Missouri wins, it's going to be because of that. But to your point, Chief, number one, underline 5 exclamation points, it is in the trenches, I feel like, on both sides of the ball.
Well, and kind of an appendix to that is the linebacker situation for KU, which I think is definitely the biggest storyline for Kansas defensively, which is, hey, you brought in these athletic transfer linebackers. You brought in, an all-MAC guy in Joe Sip. You brought in a guy in Bengali Kamara who is incredibly athletic and talented. And, okay, hey, you feel really good about your top 3-4 linebackers, right? Well, then we haven't had a chance to even see Joe Sip play in a game yet due to what seems like a right arm wrist injury. And then you had the Bengali Kamara not play against Wagner. Lance Leipold revealed it was a non-contact injury suffered early in the week in practice. There was a report out that doesn't sound like it's a season-ending injury, which is obviously a positive thing for KU, but certainly Kamara is seemingly not going to be available for this game against Missouri. And then you look at John Kamara, who was in line to get a lot of reps against Wagner and ends up getting ejected for a targeting play, right? And you kind of saw the result was Kansas was down to Ezra Virgil, who was a former walk-on, playing significant snaps, right, against Wagner, along with guys like Logan Brantley and Trey Lathan. And so you look at a group that you were maybe feeling pretty good about depth-wise, or feeling pretty good about, hey, this is a group of guys that maybe can contain a guy like Bo Prabula when you think about a Bengali Kamara. And now all of a sudden it's turned into a huge question mark for you heading into this game, where you're going to be asking a guy in a second year in the program and John Kamara to more than likely be a starter and play a significant chunk of snaps along with a guy like Trey Lathan, right? And Jason Gilliam's another player that is very experienced, but we haven't seen him play yet this season either.
Yep.
So you're talking about basically your top 3 guys being Trey Lathan, John Kamara, and Logan Brantley, right? Before you get into, again, potential former walk-on territory with Ezra Virgil. And that's not a knock on him. That's just saying, like, hey, that's your situation, right? Yeah. Like, that's where you're at. So that, to me, is quite alarming. And it's really disappointing, because I do think, considering the matchup against Missouri with a guy like Bo Prabula, with what you mentioned with their offensive line and their running game, somebody like Bengali Kamara could be a guy that tips the scales one way or the other. So him not being out there is a very, very significant blow for Kansas, and it'll be critical to see how they address that, right? In terms of, with John Kamara, again, kind of coupled on top of that is the fact that I think he had 11 snaps against Wagner before he got ejected. So you talk about a guy that, hey, you would have loved to have him out there for the whole game against Wagner to get, more reps before he goes into the Missouri game, but that's a lot of pressure on that player. And again, I hate to frame it in this way, but I really do kind of feel like it could hinge on that, right? Like if Missouri is able to exploit that lack of depth, the lack of experience at the linebacker spot, that could, I think, change the complexion of the game.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that Missouri's probably going to want to do that involve KU's linebackers making plays. And I think that's kind of the difficult part about it. And Bengali Kamara, I thought, showed so much potential as a chess piece in the opener against Fresno State. When you looked at, not only did he line up in the middle, as a guy that could play a traditional linebacker spot, you had him rushing the passer from different spots. He was somebody that hey, Nick, if you were going to have a spy on Bo Pribula, Bengali Kamara probably would have been a pretty good candidate. And so I thought it was interesting, DK McDonald talking this week about how the defense can adjust and change depending on which linebackers in the game to kind of depend, basically frame up their strengths and not have them playing to their weaknesses. I'm interested to see what that looks like, right? I think that there are some things that John does really well. There are things that Logan Brantley does well. There are things that Ezra Vettrell does well. And so I'm interested to see what the game plan looks like at that linebacker position, what they're going to ask those guys to do, and ultimately whether that's a position that can hold up well enough for Kansas to do well. I'll be interested too. Do you take your Hawk spot, with Mason Ellis, have him play a little more in the box? Do you take a guy like Lyric Rawls and have him sneak up a little bit to give you a little bit of extra presence? There are some things that you can do, but obviously those things that you do also leave you a little more open to maybe be countered in some other ways. And so that's going to be a fascinating storyline to watch.
All right, let's take a quick break, and then we'll get into some players to watch and a little bit more of our thoughts on KU and Missouri. And don't forget, later in the show, Bill Whittemore is going to join us as well to talk about his experience playing at Kansas and playing against Missouri. And again, I would highly encourage you, go check out our interview with Tony Sands, who was just phenomenal as always. We had a chance to talk to David Lawrence about some of the great history and great stories of this rivalry. And we also have a very special guest that's going to be joining us coming up later on this week that you'll want to keep an eye out for as well. So lots of content to consume to get you ready for Saturday afternoon against Missouri. And by the way, we're going to be live from Columbia after the game for our post-game show coming up on Saturday afternoon, immediately following the conclusion of the game. So if you have not already, I would highly encourage you to subscribe, especially on our YouTube channel, so that you'll be notified when we're live on YouTube, so that you can come hang out with other KU fans and talk about this KU Missouri game on Saturday afternoon. Before we take a quick break, I do want to remind you that if you are somebody who maybe attended some KU games last year at Arrowhead Stadium, you could be on the field calling all Chiefs fans. You could be on the field at the 50-yard line inside GEHA Field for the official coin toss at a Chiefs home game this season. Visit Chiefs.com/GEHA now to enter to win a chance to be on the field for a once-in-a-lifetime view of the pregame coin toss. Plus, you can score other exclusive prizes. Enter for a chance to win at Chiefs.com/GEHA. GEHA is a proud partner, of the Kansas City Chiefs. More KU Missouri talk is coming up next.
What's up, guys? I'm BJ Kissel, founder and CEO of KC Sports Network, and I'm here to talk to Kansas City businesses. If you rely on technology, you need an IT support team that's not just another vendor, but a true IT partner. That's why I want to introduce you to my friend and neighbor, KJ Miller. He is a VCIO at ThrottleNet, the Midwest's highest rated and most reviewed IT support company. They've been in business for more than 25 years, helping companies stay secure, productive, and ahead of the curve. They aren't just IT support, but they provide data security, IT strategy, and cloud software services. They do it all, and their reviews show they do it better than anyone else. So if you want to hear about how ThrottleNet can help your local business, join the conversation with myself, KJ Miller from ThrottleNet, and our resident genius from KC Sports Network when it comes to IT, at least as he's affectionately known by us, Mr. Craig Stout. Click the link in the description to hear how ThrottleNet can help you.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your number one source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
Success in real estate takes more than vision. It takes the right financial partner. When someone takes something rundown and turns it into something great, that's called a comeback story, like Brain Group. They take distressed properties here in KC, completely rework them, and then turn them into valuable real estate. But that kind of work needs the right bank behind it. Enter Emprise Bank. They're not about cookie-cutter loans. They saw Brain Group's vision, backed them, and now they're making big moves in Kansas City real estate. Talk about your partner in possible. Emprise doesn't do one-size-fits-all financing. They invest in potential and back growth. Visit emprisebank.com/KC to learn more. Emprise Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, along with Kevin Flaherty. Bill Whittemore is going to be joining us a little bit later on in the show to talk about his experience playing at Kansas and playing against Missouri. So be sure to stick around for that. And again, check out all of our other interviews that we're doing with some KU greats talking about what this rivalry means. And to quote the great Don Fambro, I think it's not a rivalry, it's a war. So be ready for that. And again, very special guest coming up that we're really excited to talk to you later on in the week also, that you'll want to be keeping an eye out for on Friday. So look out for that also. Kevin, over the course of our conversation just before we hit the break, one guy that we didn't really spend too much time talking about at all that I think also is going to be a real difference maker in this game is Jaylen Daniels.
Yes.
I mean, you're talking about going into a game like this where you expect it to be a tough environment, probably one of the toughest environments you'll see this season, and maybe one of the toughest environments you have seen over the past handful of seasons. Well, you've got a guy who's basically seen it all at quarterback in Jaylen Daniels. And I kind of asked David Lawrence about this, and I want to get your take on it as well. But, I mean, how important is that? You've got a guy who is that experienced, who has been through the ups and downs of college football over the course of his career, and he's the one leading you into battle on Saturday afternoon. How significant is that?
I think it's huge. And I think we've talked about this with Jaylen in the past before he even, got off to the ridiculously hot start he's on right now. But this is a team and a program that kind of takes its cues from Jaylen Daniels. I think that he's the type of guy that can give you that charge and that belief that no matter what atmosphere you're going into, no matter what you're facing, you're going to come out with a victory. And I think he's so important for that reason. I think he's important because he's been reading the game really well right now, and that includes, before the snap. And, they always say that the best attribute for a quarterback isn't making plays. A mediocre quarterback can make a play. What the great quarterbacks do is they get you out of bad plays, one way or another. Some do it at the line of scrimmage, Peyton Manning checking to the right play. Other guys can do it after the snap. And obviously, we have a number of Chiefs fans on here, and you see that with Patrick Mahomes, sort of making things right after the snap. He does it before the snap as well. But with Jaylen, I think both of those are going to come into play here, because I think there's going to be some times where he's going to need to make the right checks and alignments and right reads in order to get KU into the right play, out of a bad play. He's also going to need to get KU out of some bad plays because he's going to face some pressure in this one. We talked about it a little bit in the open, but Missouri's defensive line is really good. And Kansas's offensive line, I think, has had some really good moments. I think there have been a couple moments in there where maybe they've been a little bit more inconsistent. Even so, Missouri is probably going to try to get pressure with four guys. I'm not saying they're not going to blitz. I'm just saying this is a defensive line that may be good enough that you don't have to blitz in order for them to get pressure. And so can Jaylen manipulate that pocket? Can he escape the pocket when he needs to keep plays alive? All of that's going to be key. And Nick, the other thing that I think is going to be really key, I expect a lot of option in this game. I really do. I think it's similar to what we saw from Kansas in 2022, excuse me. When you go to West Virginia, you're on the road. West Virginia kind of prepared to face one thing. Kansas has shown a little bit of option so far, just enough to sort of wet your beak. And they've done a little bit of play action off of that option, but we haven't really seen the full package with all of the bells and whistles and, the motion this way. And, oh my gosh, a wide receiver's catching the pitch and all of the things that we know is kind of hidden up in that playbook somewhere. And so I anticipate that this is a game that Jaylen is not going to need to just throw the ball well, Nick, not just make right decisions, but I think he's going to need to use his legs well in order for Kansas to win as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you're absolutely right. This game does seemingly line up for an opportunity for Kansas to utilize more of that option, because what's one of the best ways to mitigate a really powerful and aggressive defensive line? It's to get them out of position, right? Move them around, get them in different spots to where they can't make the play, right? And you can do that with the option, right? You can do that with Jaylen Daniels keeping it, Jaylen Daniels pitching it to Daniel Highshaw. Maybe you get Cam Pickett. I mean, we saw Cam Pickett involved on some RPO plays, right, where you can get him involved. Emmanuel Henderson. I mean, I'm salivating at the thought of getting him on, more jet sweeps and more plays where he's involved in the option. So, yeah, I think it makes sense that would be an area that Kansas would try to lean into a bit more in this game because of the fact that you have a really powerful Missouri defensive line, and you don't want it to be a situation where you're just overwhelmed. And, I mean, Jim Zabrowski talked about this, right? 3rd and 9 to 3rd and 12, that is the bad place to be in this game if you're Kansas, right? And so any way you can avoid doing that, in keeping the defensive line off balance, keeping that front seven of Missouri guessing about who's got the ball, who's taking the ball where, all that I think makes a lot of sense for Kansas in this game. And then on top of all that, like you mentioned, I mean, we know Jalen is very proficient as a runner and as somebody who is running the option as well. So I think it makes a lot of sense that that's an area that Kansas may lean into. Le'Shawn Williams, by the way, I would assume he's going to play. We'll see how much he plays. I think we kind of talked about it last week. I got the impression, certainly, and I think you did, Kevin, that as well, that if the Missouri game was last week, LeSean Williams would have played. I think that was kind of the vibe that we were getting. So I would expect him to play. We'll see how much he does, but obviously you'll rely a lot on Daniel Highshaw as well in this one. And then, Kansas has 4 tight ends as well that we've seen get involved in different ways. Deshaun Hannikus with the touchdown against Wagner. Carson Brune has been, I think, a real pleasant surprise with what he's been able to show, because I think we knew that he was a guy, Kevin, that could be a really solid blocker, but he's proven his chops in the receiving game as well for Kansas in these first couple of games. So that could be an area where Kansas has an opportunity to really utilize the tight ends in a lot of different ways also in this game against Missouri. So let's get into, Kevin, what do you think of players to watch? Give me a offensive player to watch, defensive player to watch. Who are you?
It has to be Jalen Daniels on offense. And so I actually want to pick somebody else because we talked so much about Jalen, and the obvious pick, it's Jalen, right? Like, I think if you ask both of us, you would say it's Jalen. One of the things that I'm really interested to see in this one, Nick, is Kansas, I think, is going to want to run the ball and maybe try some different things to run the ball. One of the things that Devin Neal was so good at was he could make your offensive line right. You could miss a block. He could miss a guy, make a guy miss, make the right cut, and he's out the gate for 12 yards and a big first down. I thought Daniel Highshaw looked so much more comfortable against Wagner in terms of running, more naturally. I don't know if it was, hey, this is my first game as the guy, against Fresno State or what it was. But against Wagner, I thought you started to see the Daniel Highshaw that I think is an all Big 12 candidate. LeSean Williams is a guy that I think showed against Fresno State is somebody that can kind of make the offensive line right with a cut here and there. The vision is there. I'll pick Highshaw, and the reason I'll pick Highshaw is just like I said, it's going to be Jalen, but I think too, while you're going to use Jalen's legs, you'd still rather not have Jalen take 20 carries in a game where, the other team is absolutely looking to smoke him. And so I think if Highshaw is able to just run really naturally, if he's somebody that is able to make that right cut, pick up sort of the maximum amount of yards on his carries, that's going to go a long way in making Jalen Daniels' life easier. The other part, Nick, and the part that makes him so much fun to watch is Daniel Highshaw is an absolutely lethal pass protection guy. And so he's also potentially going to have his hands full with trying to meet, Trotter or whoever, if they do come after Jalen Daniels. And so I'm going to go with Daniel Highshaw as my pick. Like I said, staying away from Jalen being the obvious pick there.
Well, and I like Daniel Highshaw too, because talk about a guy that could set the tone physically.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if you gave him the ball early in the game to set the tone in terms of the physicality, like I like that as well. So yeah, I mean, we talked a lot about Jalen Daniels. Obviously, I think he's going to be the engine that's going to to this offense in this game. But you mentioned Daniel Highshaw. I'll look to the outside. I'll go with Emmanuel Henderson, right? I think against Fresno State, we didn't really get to see Emmanuel Henderson maybe as the true, legitimate, deep threat every play that maybe I think we were expected. We got to see that against Wagner, right? Well, now, can he do it again against Missouri, right? Because you just talked about, Highshaw. We've talked about Jalen Daniels in the running game. If you have Emmanuel Henderson, who is a legit threat to just run by his guy, and any given play, that is going to open things up so much more for Kansas in other areas, right? With the option, with the ground game, with getting the tight ends involved in the intermediate passing game. If you have just Emmanuel Henderson just ready to go, and again, I think we talked about it with the Fresno State game. He doesn't necessarily have to make one of those catches, but really the threat of it, right? And we saw him draw a pass interference penalty against Fresno State. It's not necessarily that you have to hit him, every time he does it, but just that threat, just that potential of blowing the top off of a defense like that can really open things up. So he's a guy to watch, I think. And again, I think he's somebody that even if he doesn't make any of those deep catches over the course of the game, you could maybe still look back and say, hey, he influenced the defense this way, or he, generated something that helped out the rest of the offense. So he's somebody to keep an eye on as well. I think Cam Pickett is a good pickup, is a good call out as well, because of the fact that, again, he was the guy that was utilized on sort of those RPO plays. So if he's involved in that way, you get him the ball in the flat like they did against Fresno State, and he can take off and run. That would be really good as well. So to me, Kevin, the defensive side of the ball for Kansas is the more intriguing side heading into this game. Who's somebody to keep an eye out on defense?
John Kamara. Like there are other guys that are going to be important, and it's kind of across the defense. And there, you could have easily picked a cornerback or a secondary player with that Missouri group of wide receivers. But if Trey Lathan is the only linebacker playing well, then Kansas could have a long day for a variety of reasons. One of them being Bo Pribula is a guy that can really run and really does a lot of nice things. You may need an extra guy who's going to help pressuring the quarterback and being somebody that can get after him with the blitz. And the other part is, if Missouri's getting 7-8 yards a carry with Ahmad Hardy, you're not in a good spot. And so I think that's going to be a key part of it too, because I think the defensive tackles are going to do their job. And so you're going to have Hardy, sort of bouncing around. He's a guy that breaks a lot of tackles. That was sort of his profile coming out, was it's really tough to get a good shot on this guy. And so I think with Ahmad Hardy, with Bo Pribula, and all of those things, if John plays above his years and really has a standout game, that could be one of the things that we're talking about after the game is, hey, this is a big part of the reason that Kansas wins this contest.
Yeah, and I think further along those lines, like you said, if Missouri is able to run the ball that successfully, that basically eliminates guys like Dean Miller and Leroy Harris, right? I mean, those guys can only be really at their peak effectiveness if they're able to do what they do best, which is rush the quarterback. But, I think some coaches have said this, but you got to earn the right to rush the passer, right? Meaning you have to be able to stop the run as well, to set yourself up in those pass situations. So I think that really even kind of further highlights the importance of those linebackers, because you want to be able to do that so that you can put some of your better D linemen in the position to do what they do best, which is get after Bo Pribula. But you mentioned something about the secondary there, and that's where I'm going to go with my pick here. DJ Graham, we had a chance to see him against Wagner a little bit. I'm going with DJ Graham because this is a young secondary, right? It's a young secondary, but at the same time, it is a secondary that has some guys that have played quite a bit. When you think about Jalen Todd, and now Austin Alexander, I think, is a guy that's continuing to get more playing time. You throw in a Jaleel Hurley, who is young but athletic and talented, right? But DJ Graham, I think, is the guy that could bring all that together because of his leadership, because of his experience, and because of his communication ability. So much of what we heard about him in camp when he was dealing with an injury was that even when he wasn't out there, he was having an equal impact in terms of making sure guys are in the right spot, talking to guys, communicating with guys. I'm looking at him in this game because it is going to be so critical. Because when you talk about the Missouri receivers that you highlighted, when you think about a guy like Kevin Coleman, similarly to Emmanuel Henderson, they have multiple guys that really could take any opportunity to make a huge play, right? And you've got to be able to deny that if you're that KU secondary. So I think DJ Graham is a guy to watch in terms of making sure everybody's in the right spot, communicating, and making sure that secondary stays on the same page to try to limit the threats that Missouri has on the outside. So that's my pick on the defense.
Yeah, those guys have to get off blocks too, and that was something that DJ did pretty well on a big Trey Lathan play against Wagner. Was he was able to fight back to the inside and sort of fight through the block and force the receiver back inside where somebody could make a play. Look, Nick, the easiest path for Missouri's receivers to make big plays in this game, or the easiest path, would be to just, hey, Kevin Coleman's really fast. Let's throw a bubble screen to him, and if guys can't get off blocks, he's going to go wild. And I think that the more you can force Missouri into situations where they have to throw the ball down the field, I'm not saying that it's going to stop them, because, Bo Pribula was terrific in their opener. Their receivers are really good, but it puts you in a better position to win. Whereas if Missouri is able to run the ball and then just, hey, we're going to throw short stuff outside and still get gains from it, it makes it really, really tough if you can't force Pribula and force Missouri into taking some risks down the field. And so I like the pick that you have too, because I do think that that's going to be a key part of it. Not just, hey, defend this guy on the crossing route, but also it looks like they're throwing the bubble screen, like make sure that Coleman or whoever, doesn't have an easy path to, 8 to 12 yards every time they run it.
Back in August when we picked the season, you picked Kansas to win this game. I actually picked Kansas to lose in our preseason predictions. So I'll ask you first, Kevin, are you sticking to your guns? Do you like Kansas on Saturday against Missouri?
Yeah, I think so. It's going to be close, and it may. I've heard people say it's going to be high scoring. I've heard people say it's going to be low scoring, and I see both ways, right? Like that it could turn either way. So I'll kind of cut it down the middle. I think Kansas 28-24. The reason I like Kansas ultimately at the end of this day, Nick, is Jaylen Daniels. I think that he's going to be able to avoid some of the negative pressure plays that Missouri would be able to put on a lot of other quarterbacks. Jaylen was one of the least sacked quarterbacks in the country a year ago. And a big part of it, I'm not saying the offensive line wasn't good, but a big part of it was his ability to avoid pressure and make things happen even when guys were getting relatively clean shots on him. And so I think when you look at, hey, the impact that Jaylen could have, and then too, Nick, if you perceive this to be a close game, which I think it is going to be, which quarterback do you trust in the final 5 minutes? And that's not a knock on Bo Pribula. I just think he's not proven that yet. He hasn't been in those situations really yet. And we've seen Jaylen in a lot of big games over a lot of big situations. And so if you're asking me, hey, this is a game that's tied, or a team's within one or whatever in the final minutes of a game, I think the level that Jaylen is playing at right now gives KU the edge to where I'm saying if it's a close game at the end, I like Kansas's quarterback to pull this one out. How about you?
After talking with Tony Sands, after talking with David Lawrence, there's no way I could pick against Kansas in this game now. I got to pick KU. I'm not picking those clowns to the East. Are you kidding me? No. Hell no. Yeah, give me Kansas, man. I think what you outlined is also really good. And yeah, if it's a one possession game late, you're right. How could you not trust Jaylen Daniels over Bo Pribula? And again, that's not to take away from what Bo Pribula has done. And listen, he could very well prove us wrong. Like this could be a game where he has an opportunity to prove that he can do it, but he hasn't yet. And I think you would look at that and say, I'll take Jaylen Daniels late in the game in that scenario. And I do think it's going to be a close game. I do think it's going to be, a pretty nip and tuck game most of the way. Obviously, I think there is concern about, for me, Missouri's D-line could just completely blow up the game, right? And that could really disrupt things. But on the flip side, I think Kansas, besides the linebacker spot, is in a decent position to try to defend Missouri. The issue, I think, offensively with Missouri against KU's defense is kind of what you mentioned earlier, which is if they're able to just line up and run the ball pretty successfully, I will be a little bit concerned. But I'm going to go with Kansas. I think the defense will keep it close. The offense will do enough. And again, late in the game, I'm riding with my guy, Jaylen Daniels. I'll take Kansas. You said 28-24. I'll go 27-23 Kansas. 27-23. I think Kansas gets it done. Dude, I can't pick those losers out in Columbia on game. Come on, man. That's foolish of me. But speaking of former players that have played in this game, played in this rivalry, Bill Whittemore, had a chance to speak with him. He's going to be joining us coming up next here on the show to talk about his experiences with this rivalry. And again, I've teased it a couple times now. You'll want to keep an eye on your feed on Friday for a very, very special guest who has played in probably the most consequential games of this rivalry in 2007 and 2008. Coming up on Friday. So that's a little bit of a teaser for you. But Bill Whittemore is coming up next. By the way, if you are a gambling person, we have you covered with KCSN's betting analyst, Benny Heisler. He'll break down the numbers for you coming up next, and then we'll talk to Bill Whittemore.
Happy Border Week, everybody. It is KCSN betting analyst Benny Heiss here. We got an update on the lines for this week's Border War Showdown. I've got my pick coming up in just a moment, but I live on the Kansas side. I was driving to the Missouri side, ironically, for something that you can't get in Kansas. And it continues to hit me that Missouri fans and Missouri sports fans have been waiting forever. But the good news is the wait is almost over because DraftKings Sportsbook, America's top-rated sportsbook app, is finally coming to the Show Me State. And if you have to think about waiting until December 1st to get started, think again. You can sign up right now. And when we go live, new Missouri resident customers get $300 in bonus bets for placing just a $5 bet. $5! That is less than your seasonal pumpkin spice latte. It is pumpkin spice latte in addition to football season. But listen, this isn't some rinky-dink operation. It's DraftKings Sportsbook. You get live in-game betting, lightning fast payouts, so many ways to play, all from your phone or mobile device. And when you go live, you are betting with a sportsbook trusted by millions that is safe, secure, with fast withdrawals, everything that you could possibly want. All right, let's talk a little KU Mizzou. The Jayhawks are currently the underdog, plus 200 on the money line at DraftKings. Mizzou favored by 6.5 points. Slightly towards the Mizzou side at minus 6.5 at minus 115. Total right now at 50.5, slightly towards the over at minus 115. Now, as of Wednesday, the money seems to be on the Tigers. That's according to the DraftKings Network Live splits. 73% of the betting handle on Mizzou compared to 62% of the bets. The same goes with the total approaching that key number of 51. 87% of the cash on the over at 50.5. And while there's movement towards the over, I'm going to actually zag a little bit, and I'm going to take the first half under at 25.5. Both of these teams are going to be amped up, and we've seen both of these defenses play well. They take a stand early on so far, and we've also seen this as a thread and a common theme throughout college football with the offenses eventually catching up in the second half, but leading with the first half defense. So I expect this to be a little bit more offensive as the game goes on. Mizzou is also a very good first half game total underplay. 5 of their last 7 home games, including 4 of 5. KU tends to be a little bit slower starting on the offensive side. In general, going 4 of their last 5 on the under in the first quarter at home. So I like that first half under 25.5 over at DraftKings Sportsbook. Now here is your move. You download the DraftKings Sportsbook app today. Use code KCSN. And remember, when we go live December 1st, that $5 bet turns into $300 in bonus bets. Code KCSN in partnership with DraftKings Sportsbook. Remember, if you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER, 21 plus and physically present in Missouri. Eligibility restrictions apply. Bonus bets expire 7 days after they are issued. Excludes customers who redeem the pre-launch sign-up offer. All the terms available at sportsbook.draftkings.com/promos.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, and I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. And as promised, we have a very special guest joining us on today's show, continuing our discussion with former KU players. Of course, we're talking about all things KU and Missouri leading up to Saturday afternoon in Columbia. We're joined by Bill Whittemore, who was quarterback for Kansas in the early 2000s. Bill, thanks so much for joining us today.
Nick, Kevin, appreciate you having me on, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Bill, first off, kind of wanted to start off with just a little bit of background before we get into more talking about Missouri stuff. For you personally, I understand you committed to KU before you even had a chance to come to campus, actually, when you first joined the Jayhawks. What was it about KU that appealed to you, and how did you end up becoming a member of the team?
Well, it's not probably that flattering, but I bounced around a little bit before. I went to UT Martin out of high school, which is a FCS school. The coach that recruited me there was a spread guy. He got fired his first year there. I redshirted. And then the new coach came in and ran smokestack triple option. Wasn't really my forte, but I was there with a bunch of friends from high school. So we stuck it out, tried it. I ended up getting hurt week 2 of that season. Came back and actually played the last game of the year, which actually came to haunt me. I could have gotten a medical and had one more year at Kansas if I hadn't played that last game, which I didn't realize at the time. And then I went junior college for just a semester, really, in Fort Scott. And so had a good season, but I got hurt at the end of that season as well. You'll see a common thread between every season that I played in. So I got hurt. I hurt my throwing shoulder, and I had some decent offers, but they all kind of started drifting away when they found out I'd hurt my throwing shoulder. And so Coach Mangino got hired, if I recall, pretty late in the game, maybe at that time. I don't know. I think it was probably December or January. I don't know if that's considered late or not. And so I was on a recruiting visit somewhere else, and he calls while I'm right there with the coaches. And so I tried to deflect the phone call a little bit, and I ended up just school started kind of disappearing on me a little bit, and that was Kansas was by far the biggest in regards to conference of play. And honestly, I didn't know a lot about Kansas. Didn't know much about the town, but I did, man. I jumped at it. Just the opportunity to play in the Big 12 at the time. It's obviously a lot different than what it is today. I don't even know what it is today, to be honest. I mean, really, it changes every year, I feel like. But yeah, man, I just wanted to compete at the highest level I could compete at. And I didn't really care about, the record the year before or what. I knew obviously Coach Mangino's record and where he was coming from and what he was bringing to the table. And I just wanted the chance to play at the highest level and test my abilities against the teams that were in that conference. And so I was honored for the opportunity. I was probably the last one left on the board for them, and just wanted to take that and run.
You wound up winning the starting quarterback job a little ways into your first season at Kansas. And then you actually were starting, I believe, heading into the Missouri game in Columbia. You had the injury there that kind of ended your season. But injury aside, sort of what do you remember about that Missouri game, about preparing to go to Columbia, the atmosphere, sort of all the things that went with that?
Yeah. So again, the common thread is I got hurt every time I stepped on the field, I feel like. So yeah, I didn't. I didn't get in till I came in at halftime against Iowa State, the first game, and played the rest of the way out until this Missouri. I'm trying to remember when I got hurt. I think it was fairly early, actually. But yeah, I recall. I mean, the epic moment for me is Coach Fambrough coming in and talking to the team, and it was like, holy cow, this is different. Obviously anytime you have a state versus a state that are right next to each other, you're going to feel some tension, but it was, I had no idea the emotion behind the fan base around this game. So that's kind of when it became clear to me. I think his quote that I recall was I'm going to fill up on gas and I'm going to take my cooler of peanut butter jellies and drinks, and I'm not going to spend a penny in the state. As soon as the game's over, I'm turning around and driving back. And I was like, holy cow, man, this is awesome. So, and a bunch of my teammates were from the area. So, I mean, you felt the energy as soon as that game arrived on the schedule for that week.
Yeah. I'm curious, kind of along those lines. I mean, was Fambrough, that speech, was that sort of your introduction to it? Had you heard about it from any other teammates, former players, guys that had played in it before? I mean, had you heard about it at all?
No, not really. Other than, I guess, my first week on campus, I was what did I do, man? And this is too long ago. I think I came in January, if I'm not mistaken, and my first intro to it would have been a Kansas Missouri basketball game. And so we got into that, and just obviously the field house is always rocking, but for that game, it was my first time in the field house. So I didn't know necessarily, but it was electric, as it always is, but I felt like it was probably more so because of that, and 2 top 10 teams, I think, at the time too. I think Missouri was up there. Obviously, Kansas is always up there. So yeah, but prior to that, I think that was my intro to it. But again, I didn't know much about it at all before landing on campus. And then from that stretch, we were obviously focused on the next team, the next task, leading up to it. But it definitely ramped up that week for sure.
That 2003 team is maybe the most unique team that I've ever covered from a personality standpoint. You guys had a lot of wild people, so many guys, coming in from junior college in that class too. You had been there the year before. There were a bunch of guys coming in the next year. It almost at times felt like watching a real life version of the Replacements. What was it about that group or of guys that sort of made that group equipped to sort of end that string of Kansas losing and getting you guys to a bowl game?
Good question. I would obviously, it appears Coach Mangino was ahead of his time before the transfer portal, right? He lacked on the NIL deals, but other than that, he was getting us in. I think he just did a good job recruiting. He put together a incredible staff. As I look back on that staff, and I was pondering on getting into college coaching, GA when I came back. And I mean, as I look at where those coaches have gone, I mean, every one of them are successful somewhere, or were at some point in time. There's head coaches in different parts of the country, and everybody's on that staff. And really, when I went back in GA as well, on that staff, we're all very successful. So I think that's probably the key ingredient was just the recruiting piece. It wasn't just, it was junior colleges, but it was all guys who, the common thread was just probably work ethic, honestly.
Yep.
I don't think any of us were super talented or oversized. We're all just normal people, but wanted to work and wanted to compete. And I think that changing, from his year one, that was 2002, which wasn't that successful, right? We were, I don't even remember, 2-9, maybe. I don't remember how many games we won, not 6. And so just the work ethic for a year, the ability to have, grasp of the offense and defense for a year. And then I think it kind of all started to click a little bit in 2003. Wasn't clicking to what they're doing now, but it was a great start for the foundation that's being portrayed today.
Well, when it comes to playing against Missouri, you kind of talked about, the week leading up to it, but for a lot of fans, they're very passionate about it. It means a lot, but what about actually on the field? What do you remember about playing the game itself against those guys? Did it feel different when you were playing versus any other game, or what was kind of your remembrance of that?
The first game was in 2002, was there. That's when I got hurt. I tore my knee up a little bit. The energy felt different. The fan base obviously is electric even there. I don't remember any different type of language on the field or treatment of players. I'm sure it happened. I try not to get too caught up in that ever, if I could. I don't remember anything that abnormal that took place. Obviously, when they came back to our place in 2003, I think they were in the top 25, I believe, maybe 5-0. And so they had a lot of recognition around them. I think we were 4-1, if I recall. So it was a big game for us. Stakes were high, and we kind of wanted to see what we were about that game. So I feel like that for me obviously stands out, mainly because we won. But it was just full of energy, full of excitement. But I mean, that comes with a sold out crowd, right? Like, the place was crazy. It was awesome. We've sold it out a few times, but it wasn't always for the right reasons. And that was for the right reasons. And it was special.
Coach Mangino joked one time after you were gone. He said that Todd Reesing ran because he wanted to, but you had to run for survival. Even so, was there something in that 2003 game that you guys liked about your ability to use your legs? I know you wound up carrying it 16 times, I think 76 yards, 2 touchdowns. Some of it was design. I think you scored a touchdown on like a quarterback draw type play. But was there something heading into that where you're just like, hey, this could become a major part of this game plan?
I don't think so. Anything specifically for that game. I'm not going to mention said lineman that we were talking about before. But we were young up front. I think we had just gotten Joe Vaughn had just come in. He was another JUCO transfer. Was an incredible center. And then the line across the board. I'm trying to even recall, man. I think Bob Whitaker was starting as a freshman. Coker and Lewis, sophomore, juniors. No, Danny might have been a senior with me. Anyway, I don't want to get into that. I think for us, it was just keeping the chains moving. Part of my game had always been running and throwing. So, I mean, I love getting out of the pocket. I couldn't always see well in the pocket, and throwing on time was not necessarily my greatest assets. The quick game stuff, and then just trying to make a play, giving your receivers time to get open. And I always enjoyed getting out of the on the perimeter and trying to make plays, and that was kind of just the way I played. And so, I think run game wise, I think adding Clark Green was primarily our tailback. He was physical as could be. And so adding him in as a blocker and having a guy that would, run hard behind him, but couldn't make anybody miss and didn't have great speed, what would allow for 5 to 6 yards a carry and keep the chains moving.
You guys win that game in 2003 against Missouri in Lawrence. What do you remember maybe of the aftermath of it? Was there a celebration? Do you remember anything about what happened after you guys won that one?
Yeah, I remember getting criticized for keeping my helmet on after the game. I think it was Fox Sports maybe was covering it, and I got interviewed after the game. And I kept my helmet on, and all my friends were like, "What are you doing, man?" I was like, "Dude, it was crazy. I don't even know." I think I was just getting pelted on the head with fans. I mean, everybody was everywhere, so it was mayhem. It was awesome. I remember seeing the goalpost come down. I remember going back out and taking a photograph with the team. It was a pretty memorable moment for me, and I think for all of us that were there.
A lot of KU fans have kind of a soft spot in their heart for you as one of sort of this group of players that brought hope back to a program that maybe hadn't had a lot of it when you arrived. What was the program like sort of the day that you showed up versus the day that you left? How was it different?
I think Coach Mangino obviously brought a lot of discipline to the program. I would say that's probably his biggest asset. And so I think that in and of itself changes the locker room, changes mentality. So, nobody's showing up late. Everybody's showing up ready to work, taking care of their bodies in the meantime. So I don't know, obviously can't speak to what took place before, I think, but I think that's the main thing. He started to bring in the older classmen, the JUCO. So it immediately changes leadership, whether or not you're a really good freshman or sophomore, it's still hard to have a voice at that level to carry a team. And so, you typically look to the elder statesmen, which transitioned quick. Right. And so, I think that was just an immediate flip of, maybe not super healthy. Right. We were very heavy in the junior college, numbers for lack of a better term for those couple years. I don't even know if that continued. I don't think it did as much, but, it was a quick switch in that regard as far as who was in that locker room. And, with that comes no knowledge of prior culture. Right. So, he set a standard quick. We were all scared home and didn't want to mess up, and knew the repercussions. If you did, you'd be having the extra workout that not many people could survive.
You obviously had playing experience in this rivalry between KU and Missouri, and you then went on to do some coaching as well. I know afterwards, after playing, if you had the chance maybe to come back and tell this year's team a little bit about this game or to try to motivate them, is there anything maybe you would tell them, anything you would say to them?
Man, I think it's just, what I love about college football, and I, you have a fan base that is just as, if not more, passionate about this game than you are. I haven't looked at the roster in a while, but I don't know how many guys are from Kansas City or Kansas or even Missouri, anywhere around that area. I know there was a lot of Texas and different areas of the country that were on our roster at the time. But if you're not from that area, and even if you are, and we kind of alluded to that before, like the fan base cares about this just as or more than you do. And so what I love about it is the opportunity to go fight for it, right? Like, I want to be on the winning side, and I want my fans to be on the winning side. And so the fact that they, care about it as much as they do just brings more and more energy, care, support, desire to go out and throw your best. And so obviously you're always trying to do that, but I think it's ramped up a little bit this week.
We talked a little bit just before the show started about the new booth. How excited are you to get out and see that at some point?
Man, I think it's incredible. I think it's awesome that the support is there and that they're getting on. After I left, they moved everything over there anyway, and it was incredible as is. But obviously that's dated. I'm old, and it was time for an upgrade. And so I can't wait to see it. I'm super excited and pumped. It's going to do nothing but help them recruit and get guys in there that can continue to propel this thing forward.
Well, Bill, I know KU fans certainly appreciate you. We appreciate you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Thanks so much. And can I get a little bit of a rock chalk before Saturday?
Rock chalk, baby. Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it. Go Jayhawks.
Thanks so much, Bill. And for Kevin Flaherty, I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See ya.